Morning glory, evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Laryngitis boomerang back a little bit. But luckily, I've got a lot of great guests, including, as we do with most Fridays, John Ellis, founder, chief editor, editor-in-chief of News Items, which you can get over at Google by finding News Items and type in John Ellis. It will take you to the Substack. Every week, John sends me 3 or 4 stories that we want to cover just to draw them to your attention. And John, I was kind of stunned by the second story today. I missed it in the newsletter this week. In 2018, Americans legally wagered less than $5 billion on sports annually. Last year, they bet $150 billion. Now, that's a big number. What are the consequences of that?
More interesting because 90% of the bets are placed on the phone, right? So the iPhone disrupted everything. It disrupted sports betting completely. And a study of 9 million gamblers from the NFL season 2023-2024 found that 60% of bettors accounted for just 1% of sportsbook revenue. So what you have is a very small subset of a large group of people doing 60% of the betting, and the concern is that they are going all in, so to speak, and putting themselves in financial difficulty, to say the least.
That's addiction land, and that's Art Schlichter land, and that's criminal activity and bankruptcy land. I was going to ask if you thought it had something to do with the affordability crisis that drives the down ballot stuff we're going to talk about. But do you think young people, do they do a crosstab on young people betting versus old people betting?
Yes, they do. I do. I mean, I have a long rap about this, which I won't go into, but I think there is, in the younger generation, especially, a sense of despair about how they're going to get ahead, how they're going to afford a house, etc. And that they're increasingly given to sort of magical thinking that if they make a bet that, they will make another great bet and another one, and they'll have enough money to do whatever it is they want to do. As I say, have a longer rap about that, but it is, I think, indicative of affordability or, prospects maybe.
It's also indicative of bad math skills. Because Vegas doesn't make anything. The reason Vegas is there is people drive there or fly there and they leave their money there. And
right.
You can't win, but that's math. It's basic math, house odds. And we've got this study from UC San Diego. Actually, it's a report. They've had to up their remedial math by, 300% in a few years because their students can't do math.
Let me just read the paragraph because I was blown away when I read this. As our campus, meaning UC San Diego, the picture is truly troubling. Between 2020 and 2025, the number of freshmen whose math placement exam results indicate that they do not meet middle school standards, grew nearly 30-fold.
That's
in 5
I think a middle
years.
School standard is not algebra yet. Right? You're doing fractions and
correct.
decimals in middle school.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
So I'm going to put it in the weekend edition, a much longer excerpt from the report. But I read it. I thought it was a typo, and I went to the actual PDF and read it, and sure enough, it wasn't a typo. And the rest of it is even more discouraging. But, that is indicative of a failure of public education on an almost epic scale.
I would also love the crosstabs on that and find out if boys and girls are receiving math differently, because I bet that they are. We'll see. The good news is the first item you sent me, which was also staggering. Women control $32 trillion of worldwide spending. The study that came out from Europe's long-term growth champions estimates that up to 80% of consumer spending is already influenced by women, but forecasts that will actually control 75% of discretionary spending in the next few years. That's probably good for the world, John. I think that's sexist, but it's probably good for the world.
Well, I can personally attest to the number of Amazon vans that pull up to our house that at least 80% of the decisions are made by women. But it has obviously all sorts of implications, not least of which is that if you're running a company that's selling a product, you better have a lot of women on your staff because they probably have a better insight into what messages women will hear and what products they want. And that's the thrust of the piece is the impact, of this Nielsen IQ report, what that means for management and marketing and so on and so forth. It's an amazing statistic. 75% of all spending is, quote, controlled, end quote, by women.
That is, and that story originally comes from the Free Press, to me, courtesy of news items. And then we go down to the one that I wanted to give the most time to, the down ballot effect. I've been on Fox a couple of times talking about Katie Wilson because it's big when you've got Marxists running municipalities on both coasts. It's kind of a double-blind study of bad economics on the East Coast and the West Coast. But I didn't look through the down ballot carnage for Republicans the way that you did. Why don't you recap the bad news for Republicans?
Well, sort of the first lesson of political analysis is that you start at the bottom up, right? So in 2020, Biden won the election. All of the coverage was about Biden winning the election. Obviously, that's very important. But politically, what happened was the Republicans swept the state legislative races, the state, county races. All of the down ballot stuff was a huge GOP win. And guess what? We see it now in the redistricting fight that's going on. They're able to change the districts in, X number of states because of what they did in 2020. The question is the off-year election, this year's off-year election, an indication of the Democrats, doing much better down ballot? And does that mean that they're setting themselves up for a better political outcome for them in 2026 and perhaps 2028. In Washington State, the headline is that this socialist woman, Katie Martin, was elected by a narrow margin, unseating a Republican incumbent. But what was more interesting was even in these little county races and town board races and special elections, the Democrats swept in the same way that the Republicans swept nationally in 2020. So that's one I think that bears watching.
Two comments on that. The first is I saw today Governor DeSantis announced they are going to redistrict Florida, possible 5 pickups for the Republicans. That's not an arms race the Democrats can win yet. They might be able to win it in 2030. But the second, do you think the Virginia down ticket is because Abigail Spanberger was that good, the blowback against President Trump is that bad, or because, my theory, Glenn Youngkin was an overperforming superstar candidate 4 years ago? What do you think?
I think that down ballot was indication of positive feelings about the Democratic ticket generally, but I think it was largely, the people who turned out wanted to send a message to Trump, and the Trump voters turned out in lower numbers. So had the Trump vote turned out at presidential levels, it probably would have been much closer.
Now, John, you'll remember, we're the same generation. Ronald Reagan won big in 1980 and got slaughtered in 1982 and won big in 1984. You think we're on the same?
He didn't actually get slaughtered in 82. He lost 26 House seats, I think. But there were 5 Senate seats that had they gone the other way, the Democrats would have taken control of the Senate. But they held all 5 seats by a grand total of like 85,000 votes. And that was the huge, for me, I was at the NBC News election unit at the time, and that's all we talked about was how Reagan held, the message Reagan had was stay the course. And that message resonated in those 5 Senate races, one of which was John Chafee in Rhode Island. He won by, the minorest of margins. And so I think that the interpretation that Reagan got slaughtered in the 82 elections isn't quite right. Yes, they lost the average number of House seats in those days, but they held the Senate, and was an indication to us at the NBC News election unit that Reagan was going to have a good 84.
Then we're going to have to look and see if the very same set of circumstances is lining up right now. A predicted loss in the House, but the Republicans feel good about the Senate. We shall see. John Ellis, always good to talk to you. Follow John at Ellis Items. Find news items on Google by typing in news items and John Ellis. Best newsletter available for those of you who love actual news.